In this video we want to talk about discrimination in employment. Now this is quite a controversial topic, and one that provokes strong opinions and feelings on either side. But most right-minded people would say that discrimination in employment is wrong. Discrimination done on the basis of prejudice cannot be justified under any circumstances. So it's a topic that occupies the minds of HR professionals up and down the country to try and ensure that there is fair working practices throughout the organisation. Discrimination occurs when there are differences in behaviour between employees and employers. Now this difference in behaviour may be the product of ill-founded perceptions, ill-founded prejudices regarding people's abilities, for example, or their reliability. It could be simply a prejudice that's been carried into the workplace from the wider society. There is no logic for it. There's no perhaps evidence underpinning it. It's just a feeling which is a feeling of superiority on one side and inferiority or imputed inferiority put on the other side. It's not just wrong or immoral or unethical. It's not just that. It is also, in an economic sense, counterproductive, because valuable human contribution may be lost as a consequence. It is destructive towards families and towards the business itself, as I just said, and it's destructive towards the whole country, because it demeans the whole country if such practices were condoned. Discrimination is unlawful, and there are laws to protect employees from unfair treatment. And this is the case in many countries where parliaments have enacted laws to ensure the fair treatment of individuals across the board. In a sense, it's sad that that has had to happen, and that people can't see each other for what we truly are, colleagues in life. But parliaments have had to enact this legislation to ensure that discrimination would not take place. Discrimination can be directed or unintentional, if you like, indirect. Working conditions or rules may knowingly disadvantage a group of people more than others. So working conditions may unknowingly disadvantage a group of people. Sometimes people are put into positions that make them feel uncomfortable. They can't make a good contribution. It doesn't suit their personality or their capability, for whatever reason. And therefore they feel uncomfortable, they feel out of place. And perhaps it was not the intention of the employer to do that, but the employer, in a non-thinking sense, simply allowed it to develop. That's an example of indirect discrimination. Direct discrimination is when it's more overt. The employer, let's say, or some members of the workforce simply are prejudiced against certain workers and set out to damage the quality of their working lives. People go to work to earn an income, to pay their bills, to look after their families and meet their commitments in life. They don't go to work to be abused or threatened or bullied. And if the basis for that is the colour of their skin or their cultural background or their gender or their disability or their sexual orientation, that makes it all the worse. That something of that nature can be used against people. It is bordering on a very bad practice indeed. Well, it's not bordering on it, it is. So, for example, It's considered discrimination if an employee has been refused training or promotion opportunities on the grounds of ethnicity or age or disability, sexual orientation, or gender, on any basis, on the basis of the colour of their eyes. If the rejection is based on some characteristic of the individual, that's not relevant to the training or to the promotion. It's just used as an excuse not to promote that person. Then that is discrimination. Differences between pay and gender is another form of discrimination. It's often the case that female workers are paid less than their male counterparts for doing exactly the same job, for being as productive as the male workers, and sometimes being more productive than the male workers, and yet they get less. And what is the logic in that? How can that be judged as fair? And everything we've done on the course has had an implicit assumption that there was fair treatment right throughout the organisations we've looked at. And now we can confront this issue where people are dealt with differently because of their gender, because of their age or their disability or whatever. And to remove that possibility, parliaments have had to enact laws to ensure fairness in the workplace. Introducing benefits for married couples, but restricted to couples in civil partnerships. In a liberal society, we should be free to live out our lives as we wish, providing we don't inflict hurt or harm or threaten other people. But not to be discriminated against because of our chosen ways of life. So sometimes people, let's say, who married couples will be treated differently within organisations than, say, people who live together or marry or form relationships that are not seen as perhaps orthodox in the eyes of the employer. We could extend this, of course, in many directions. This idea of unfairness within the workplace can be extended greatly. Some people choose not to have children, for example, and to dedicate their lives to their work and to their careers, but at the same time they have to pay a tax to support other people's children, which could be seen as somewhat unfair. Now that breaks us into a different discussion about public goods and externalities, and do they get something back from educating other people's children. So it's something that cuts across a much wider discussion, but it's nonetheless relevant. Making someone redundant because they have a protected characteristic. Now this idea of protected characteristic is a legalistic term. These are the basis upon which discrimination can take place, and they tend to be written out in law, what is a protected characteristic. But making someone redundant because of that, because of the colour of their skin or their religious orientation or sexual orientation, or because of their gender or their disability, making someone redundant because of that is unfair. Perhaps the redundancy should be based on the commercial success or failure of the business. Perhaps the redundancy should be based on aptitude to do the job and competencies and diligence within the workforce and so on. Not based on something which is not relevant. Insufficient provision in place to support disabled people at work. We live in a world where there is greater use of communications, greater use of electronic sources of productive tools and potential. And a lot of these jobs are desk bound. So people, say in wheelchairs, are ideally suited to work in this environment. And a lot of them have a lot of skills. They are competent, intelligent people. There is no need to have a building design, which deters them from engaging in employment. Simple alterations to the building can enable these people to hold successful careers and make valuable contributions. And if we think of a lot of industry, particularly in the service sector at the moment, able-bodied people are sitting at desks every day. They're not running up and down and doing a lot of manual tasks. So an argument can be made that some modifications to building would bring in a lot more talent into industry and commerce. Less favourable treatment of people who are part of a union membership. If people wish to join a union, that's their right. It's enshrined in law. They should not be discriminated against because they are members of the union and therefore are seen as perhaps not subscribing to the corporate goals or don't have the interest of the business at heart. They may very well have it fully at heart. They just want to be members of the union for that extra layer of protection in the event that they ever need it. It's unlawful to discriminate on the following grounds. Unlawful in many countries, and in particularly here in the UK. But these are called protected characteristics, and so it's wrong to discriminate against people on the basis of gender. Men and women should be treated equally. If they do the same job, then there is a case for them getting the same remuneration. Marriage or civil partnerships. It shouldn't matter. It's not relevant to work, so it shouldn't be taken into account. There's no basis for discrimination there. Gender reassignment. This is a medical and psychological issue that the person has confronted and are to be admired for their honesty and openness about that. Not to be discriminated against because of it. So there is no grounds for discrimination there. The sexual orientation of people. That's not relevant in the workplace. What is relevant is, can the person do the task? Can the person perform the task efficiently and to good quality? These are the commercial concerns. A person's sexual orientation is not relevant. Disability. The same, because someone's in a wheelchair, let's say, it doesn't mean they haven't got a good brain. So why discriminate? They can make a very valuable contribution to the business. And in fact the technology of the business, as I said earlier, is becoming more aligned with what is required by people who have disability. So there's less and less grounds to discriminate, but it should never have happened in the first place. Discriminating on the basis of race, colour, ethnic background, nationality, religion, belief. None of this is relevant in the workplace. What's relevant is, can the person do the task? Can they work productively? Can they work well within a team? Can they come up with good ideas and apply themselves and make sure the job is done and done to a good quality? These are the issues that confront business. And it's not looking at the colour of their skin or their ethnic background or their nationality, or that's not relevant. Age, same thing. Sometimes people go through life and they work in a particular occupation and they take retirement. And later on they get bored. They're retired and they're bored. So they want to re-enter the labour market. If they've got all of that experience and all of that skill, surely they are worth considering for employment and not discriminated against simply because of their age. If they're capable of doing the task, doing it to good quality, I keep saying the same thing, doing it to a good quality, they're reliable, they can work as members of teams, they're diligent in their efforts, then why discriminate? Age is not relevant. Types of discrimination. Well, we have direct discrimination, and would you believe, indirect discrimination. We've also got harassment, victimization. Now the types of discrimination, well, direct discrimination, this is treating an employee differently because of a protected characteristic. So treating people differently because of their sexual orientation. There's no grounds to treat them differently. They are there to perform tasks within the business. Providing that they perform those tasks and perform them to a high level and are reliable and of good quality, that's what matters. Their sexual orientation is completely irrelevant. So discriminating against them on the basis of, say, sexual orientation or race or colour or gender or age, disability, just does not make sense. It does not apply. They're non sequiturs. They don't join up. Indirect discrimination, arranging of workplace rules and policies which may disadvantage a group of employees, e.g. religious practices. There should be respect within the workplace for people's beliefs and opinions, and it may be political beliefs, providing they don't impinge upon others in a negative and in a negative way. Providing that doesn't happen, those beliefs and those feelings are acceptable. But if one group within the workplace, let's say, want religious artifacts or religious areas, then the organisation may object to that, because that's not what they're there for. They're not there to provide a religious setting for individuals. What they're there to do is to make products and sell the products in the market. So that's understandable. That's not discrimination. However, if people during their lunch break wish to go away and pray, that's their business. That's their lunch break. That is their time. And they should not be discriminated against if that's what they so choose to do. So it's important that the organisation looks out for indirect discrimination, areas where the organisation perhaps is punishing certain groups of workers because of their colour, their background or whatever, or because they're female. Perhaps the female employees are given the more boring, repetitive tasks. Well, that's wrong. If they were given those tasks simply because they were female, simply because of their gender, that does not make sense. There should be some process within the organisation to identify skills and abilities and competencies and assign those according to the tasks required, so that the best people are assigned to particular tasks. Not assigning people because of protected characteristics, because of their gender, because of their colour, because of their nationality, because of their age, or because of their disability. That does not make sense, and that's not what business is there for. Harassment, well, this is the inappropriate behaviour associated towards protected characteristics. For example, bullying, offensive and abusive language. This is is totally immoral, totally beyond the pale, totally unacceptable. People go to work, as I said, to earn an income, to pay their bills, and to bring income into their families, not to be bullied. And certainly not to be bullied simply because they look different, or they have a different sexual orientation, or because they're disabled, or because they're old, or because whatever. That's not what they go to work for. They don't expect that. They expect to go to work and perform particular tasks which will enable the organisation to function more efficiently and make a profit. So harassment is downright unacceptable. That is just based on sheer prejudice. Victimization, the isolation and mistreatment of individuals who have put forward a complaint regarding discrimination or harassment. If individuals are suffering in the workplace and they make a complaint, and then the organisation responds by isolating them, perhaps, or making the situation even worse. Perhaps no one talks to them, or no one communicates with them, or they're not allowed to mix during break time, or that's victimization. That's adding to the insult and adding to the problem. So it's a type of discrimination. Discrimination and women workers. Well, due to gender inequality, women workers may experience discrimination in employment. Some people say it's getting better, and that females are making great strides in trying to bridge this, and they're doing it by cogent argument, by exposing the illogicality of the discrimination. But it's a long process, and it takes a long time. But then some ladies would say, some women workers would say that it's been long enough. It needs to stop now, and that there's a logic in that, and that is true. It should never have taken place in the first place. So obviously it should stop right now. But the route that's been taken seems to be one of winning arguments and winning battles and gradually extending it. But there's still a lot of evidence to say that women are not a big component of senior management throughout industry and commerce. That's not to suggest that there should be quotas or that there should be equality. It should be 50-50. It's just simply pointing out that it's strange that not as many female workers are in senior positions as we would expect, given the proportion of female workers in the labour force. As to why that's the case, it may be down to discrimination, it may be down to other factors, but it's certainly food for thought. In some working environments, women workers may be discriminated against on the grounds of pay and gender. Sometimes women, as I said earlier in this session, women do exactly the same job as their male counterparts, and sometimes do it much better, but they get less at the end of the month. It's difficult to understand the logic behind that, to understand the reasoning. In fact, it's impossible to understand it. People who are productive as other people, get less. Why should that be the case? How can that be justified? It's simply prejudice. It's discrimination. There appears to be a view that there are men jobs and women jobs. Well, if the jobs involved hard manual work, perhaps there's a case. But many jobs now rely more on the interface with technology, with computer systems and with networks and with computer packages and processing information. So the differences, the physical difference between male and female, is not relevant. And it's very difficult to see the widespread justification for this discrimination based on men jobs and women jobs. That's a woman's job. Well, woman's job is the same as a man's job in modern industry because they're using the same tools, the same equipment, they're going through the same processes. So the grounds for the discrimination is a lot less. Over recent years, this view has been challenged, and gender equality is becoming increasingly important. Certainly, through the activities of many women, they have highlighted the need for this discussion. And as long as they keep it on the table, as long as they keep it in front of the public, then it puts the onus on the other side, the people who may be discriminating. It puts the onus on them to try and find justifications, which I think most reasonable-minded people looking at this material would say it would be difficult to justify this type of discrimination. But as long as the women who promote equality and promote more openness about conditions that are faced by women workers in industry and commerce, as long as they keep it on the table, keep it discussed, the likelihood is the greater the chances there will be of bringing about, hopefully soon, a greater recognition of these issues and a resolution of this problem. Discrimination and the ethnic minority. Well, there are inequalities in the employment of ethnic minorities in various types of jobs. Well, I say there are, it's difficult to prove. But having said that, the legislative process has meant that the obvious mismatch between employment and employment potential and employment areas and the recruitment from ethnic minorities, that has at least in an overt manner been removed. Whether it remains in a covert manner, in a more under the cover manner, is difficult to prove, but where it can be proved, it is illegal. So to say that there is discrimination based on ethnic background is difficult to prove because it is illegal. Ethnic segregation plays a role in the labour market. Well, we say segregation, it may be that certain jobs are associated with certain ethnic backgrounds, and maybe those jobs are associated with them because that was the only employment that people from those backgrounds could get because of discrimination in the past. So let's say a small minority employed in manufacturing, and then some in hotels and catering and distribution sectors. Perhaps those were the only jobs they could get. So we see a concentration of ethnic workers in those occupations. But we also see now, because of the impact, the legal impact that's come to bear in the labour market in this respect, we see more and more children from ethnic backgrounds entering the professions in terms of accountancy, medicine, dentistry and so on. So it may be breaking down, but it's a long process. Further inequalities take place at higher level jobs, managerial roles. Whilst companies may employ people from ethnic backgrounds, the promotion of those people to senior roles may be an issue, and that's something that needs to be monitored. Are they blocked from going forward on some particular basis? There are inequalities in ethnic minorities and the type of jobs available. So I've just talked about the number in hotels, catering and the distribution sector. I won't go across that again. And also the issues of employment at higher levels of management, and the availability of training and opportunities for progression within organisations. Because of the role of the public sector and the important role of the public sector, it doesn't happen within the public sector for all sorts of reasons, legal reasons and the culture of the public sector itself. But as to whether the public sector influences the private sector to change its policies is difficult, and it's difficult to see how that works, and if it does work, it may be a long-term process. There is a stereotype regarding people with disabilities which impacts on the type of job available. So in terms of disabilities, sometimes there are stereotypes and images of disabled workers which people carry, which is just based on prejudice again. It's just every case needs its own consideration, but sometimes people carry these stereotypes in their heads. They may have this idea that disabled people will take a lot of time off work for medical reasons because they're disabled. There could be accident proneness. They could be clumsy at work, and people feel that if you employ disabled workers, there'll be a lot of accidents. Again, it's prejudice. Applying this type of thinking to everyone is wrong. There may be some people who have certain disabilities which make certain tasks difficult for them. But just look at every case on its own merits. They may have to look at investment in facilities to accommodate individual needs, widening doors and changing toilet facilities and access to lifts and so on. But the investment may be very worthwhile because they will have a loyal and dedicated workforce of people who have intelligence and skills and are able to use modern technology. So there's another side of that argument. They may have poor skill levels due to long terms of unemployment. It may be the case that many people within the disabled community find it difficult to get jobs and therefore don't have up-to-date employment skills. But surely that's all the more reason to give them a chance, get them involved. Difficulties in adjusting to the work environment. It's seen that disabled workers will find it difficult to go to the place of work and get there on time, and transport problems, and again, a lot of it may be just down to simple prejudice or an excuse not to employ people with disabilities. And besides which, the use of modern technologies make working from home a credible option nowadays. It may portray a negative image to customers feeling awkward. Customers feel embarrassed. They're talking to someone who perhaps has a disability. Well, that's just using one set of prejudice to justify a different set of prejudices. One set of discriminatory rules to justify a different set. One group of people find it difficult to talk to disabled people because they feel embarrassed. There's no need to feel embarrassed. One group of humans talking to a different group of humans. But if they do feel embarrassed, then the employer thinks they're not going to employ the disabled people because to avoid the embarrassment. It's double prejudice. Discrimination and older people. Well, mature workers experience a degree of discrimination regarding age and capability. Some organisations perceive a negative image of older people. And this impacts on areas such as recruitment and selection. They may feel that they don't want to employ older people because they're not capable of doing certain tasks, or they're not as mobile, or they may find it very difficult to go into work every day, or they may need medical attention because they're old. And there's a lot of, again, stereotype thinking related to older people. They may think it's not worth promoting the older people because they're not going to stay very long. So why go through all the process of training and so on? And yet the older people will have a life's experience behind them, which perhaps the employers are not taking into account. They look at redundancy issues, and if the older people come to work, there's another layer of issues about redundancy, and if they have to, if they're trying to get flexibility into the workforce, perhaps there would be issues about making people redundant later if need be. And also the access to training and development, which may be an issue. They think it's not worth training the older people because they're not going to be here for very long, they're not going to apply themselves, they may opt out of the labour force again because they find it too arduous, so there's no point in training and developing. So it might be a type of negative image associated with older workers. The Voluntary Code of Practice on Age Diversity in Employment 1999 have successfully campaigned against promotion and recruitment aimed at age limits. So there are campaigns to try and ensure that people are not discriminated on the basis of their age, that they should be given a chance to apply for jobs and be treated fairly and equally with other applicants for the jobs. Mature people offer a range of benefits, experiences and skills, as I said earlier, which is very important. A lifetime of skills, bringing it into the organisation, and the organisation benefits from that without any training being put in place or any expense being expended on these people. Long-term employment and reducing levels of turnover. Older people tend to stay. Once they've found a job, they don't jump jobs very often. So if an employer gets older workers, they tend to be loyal and stay with that employer. So there's no need for constant recruitment expenditure. Better attendance and timekeeping and disciplinary records. Generally speaking, they are reliable. Generally speaking, older people who have all the experience of working in different organisations, they're reliable. They keep good time, and they have a good disciplinary record. They do what's required of them. And loyalty to the job as long-term recruits. They become loyal to the organisation, loyal to the management. They understand what the management's doing. They perhaps have a different perspective than younger people because of their life experiences. So they will apply themselves more loyally to the organisation and be more trustworthy within the organisation. So in this video we've looked at a lot of issues associated with discrimination, and I think the one thing that's come off all of the slides is that there's no basis for discrimination in industry. There's no basis for discrimination anywhere. But let's just focus on industry. There is no basis for discrimination within industry. People should be employed on the basis of their skills, their competencies, their application to work, their diligence, their timekeeping, their loyalty to the organisation, and their ability to work in teams and groups, and the desirable attributes of good workers. And that does not depend on issues such as age, gender, colour, religion, nationality, disability. What it depends on is whether they can do the job. Now within industry, that should be the basis upon which employment takes place. Of course, as I just said, it's wrong to discriminate in industry, but it's also equally wrong to discriminate in society. But those are issues that are left to the government to enact laws to ensure that there is fairness right throughout the society. So that's all we're going to deal with in this session. So let's leave it at that and say thank you for watching.